Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sitrep podcast. I am your host, Riskinny Jim, and we are back at the miniature wargaming table for another look at 7 Days to the River Rhine by Great Escape Games. Now, as the name probably suggests, 7 Days to the River Rhine is usually used to postulate what-if scenarios revolving around the whole idea of the Soviets and their Warsaw Pact allies crashing across the intra-German border out of what was then East Germany and Czechoslovakia into West Germany. The whole Team Yankee, Red Storm Rising, Red Army, Chieftain scenario, books like that we all remember from the 1980s and early 1990s. What we're doing today, however, is going to be a little bit different. Of course, we're still using the 7 Days to the River Rhine system, but we're taking the scenario a little further afield, and we're imagining a scenario from one of Harold Coyle's other great novels. So hopefully, if you watch this channel, you've read Team Yankee, maybe you've played the various war games. There's more than one, various war games based around Team Yankee. But another one of Harold Coyle's books that came out a little later was called Sword Point. Now, Sword Point sort of takes the same general idea of what was then the far-off future of 1990, and imagining what might have happened if the Soviets had come across their southern borders and invaded northern Iran. The whole classic, we're looking to choke off Persian Gulf oil, we want to put the West in some sort of an economic corner, we want access to a warm water port. There's all kind of reasons that Harold Coyle puts in the book. That's almost irrelevant to the plot of the novel. The whole idea is the Soviets are invading with several conventional, I think they're Combined Arms Armies, kind of like they did in Afghanistan in real life, but here they're launching a much larger invasion into, again, Iran, which of course is a much larger country. Given Iran's proximity to the Persian Gulf, it pretty much makes up half the Persian Gulf, or at least half the Persian Gulf's coastline. The Americans are not putting up with that action, and they're deploying all kinds of forces in there. Again, how likely the Americans would have been to defend Iran in the late 1980s is a bit of an open question. Nevertheless, the thought of the Soviets coming down and choking off the Persian Gulf is something that geostrategically the Americans just weren't going to be able to stand for. So, by hook or by crook, you wind up with pretty much Team Yankee South. It's the same basic kind of story. You've got large mechanized and armored formations, air cavalry, air mobile formations, the whole big combined arms, basically Airland 2000 as the American Army used to imagine in those days. Except instead of fighting in Germany, you're fighting the Soviets in Iran. Now, this book has not really stood the test of time the same way that Team Yankee has, because let's face it, Sword Point really did happen in 1991. We called it Desert Storm. Of course, it wasn't against the Soviets, it was against the Iraqis, and the results were a little different. Nevertheless, it's a great scenario, and we're going to set up the biggest table I've ever set up, 6 feet by 8 feet, a 48 square foot table, and we're going to try it out at Doss Creek House, home of the South Florida Miniatures Gaming Club. We're going to see how 7 Days to the River Rhine plays in the howling deserts of Iran. Here is the table for today's game, 8 feet by 6 feet, 48 square feet in 15 millimeter. And the force levels in this game are actually quite small. So the unit density is going to be pretty low. Don't look to see too many tank parking lots on this table. We're currently on the north side of the table where the Soviets are going to be entering. Soviets are being played by Ron and Tom. And now we're rotating around towards the southern end of the table where Steve's Americans are going to be coming on the table. I will be sort of running the game as a neutral referee. Now clearly the objective here is this airport runway in central Iran. These are the kind of battles that are often described in the Team Yankee novel. The table does look pretty open, and it is pretty open, but there are buildings and those little patches of high ground sort of escarpments there to keep an eye on. Those do provide cover even against shooting enemies with thermal sights. So proper use of tall cover is going to be a key factor in this game. Here we are looking at the Soviet forces. You start off with some basic motor rifles. Do note that every one of these squads does contain at least one RPG, and in game terms is considered to also include an SA-7 man-pads. You see a ZSU-23-4 Shilka for additional air defense. The Russians are going to need that because there is an Apache on the table. Please note that all these BMPs do count as BMP-2s, even though there are some BMP-1 miniatures there. And all of these tanks count as T-80Us, even though clearly we see some T-72s on there as well. Heading over here to the Americans, we are starting off with the big boy, the AH-64D Apache attack helicopter gunship. There's a batch of Humvees here. Now they're a bit of a mixed bag. You see some with 50 cals, some with tows, and a Mark 19 grenade launcher. Do note that the 50 cals will be considered scouts and have the reconnaissance special role. We also have an Avenger anti-aircraft vehicle and a whole bunch of Bradleys, most of whom are going to be carrying a squad of infantry. There's also a platoon of 4 M1 Abrams, actually M1A1 Abrams, and there's all the infantry. So the American force is about half the size, a smidge more than half the size of the Soviet force. However, of course, with the Apache and especially the Abrams, they do have a qualitative edge. The game is now underway. The Americans have won the first initiative roll and forced the Soviets to go first. So they're moving their vehicles onto the table. You see those red poker chips next to the Soviet vehicles. Those indicate activations. 7 Days to the River Rhine is a game that basically lets you activate a unit practically as many times as you want. The danger is every time you activate it after the first, it's at an ever-increasing difficulty number. So you want to keep very careful track of how many times a given unit has been activated. Meanwhile, Steve has brought his first Abrams onto the table. He's taken hull-down shielding behind that escarpment. He's taking a bead on a T-80 that's way across the table there. The T-80 does have partial cover. Doesn't matter because the M1 has thermal sights. M1 starts off with a 4 to hit, +1 difficulty because he's moving, +1 difficulty because the target is moving, ends up with a 6 target to hit. He rolls the dice and winds up with a 10. That's some hot dice right there. Next step, we got to see if the Abrams Sabo round has penetrated the front reactive armor of that T-80. So the way that works is you take the firepower, you roll a D10, you add those two numbers together. If it defeats the enemy's frontal armor in this case, you measure it to see what angle it is. And sure enough, that is a brewed up T-80. Awesome. So here we have some other American assets now on the table. Note that Avenger is parked where he can cover if those Hinds show up. There are 2 Soviet Hinds in the force. So the Americans are bringing in some more of their force. They're more or less taking on a defensive sort of an overwatch position. Notice that yellow bead, or that little yellow button way down there on the runway. That represents one of the game's 3 objective markers. There's one in the west, one in the east, and one in the center. Again, the Soviets are coming in from the north, and the Americans are coming in from the south. So right now we're looking from south to north. He who controls at least 2 of those objective buttons at the end of turn 6 is going to be declared the winner, unless the other side hits a breakpoint before that, which, given the open nature of this table, is probably pretty likely. We may not make it all the way to turn 6, to be honest, but we're underway. We'll see how this goes going forward. Okay, the Soviets, having taken several pretty lethal salvos from multiple Abrams now on the table, have decided enough is enough. They're calling in their 2 Mi-24 Hind gunships. Now, gunships work pretty interestingly, kind of abstractly. You can go ahead and activate them like a normal unit, and they come on your table edge, or if you spend 2 counters, or 2 activations, they can come in from either table side, as long as you're not within at least 12 inches of the enemy's table edge. So that's where you get flank shots. Turns out, the way Steve has his M1s positioned, this is well scouted by the Soviet player. Tom has found where he was able to call in his Hinds and score flank hits on one of the Abrams without coming in on the flanking table edge. So he didn't have to use 4 activations to bring on 2 Hinds. He hit him a bunch of times because getting through that choppable armor is tough, but sooner or later, one of those AT-5s did get through. Here's a vehicle that's not so tough. The M2 Bradley APC tends to go up like a tinderbox, especially when hit by T-80 main guns. Go figure. Quick spoiler alert for anyone who may not have tried 7 Days to the River Rhine, especially in this game. Units like the M1A1 Abrams, Challenger 2, Leopard 2, top-line NATO battle tanks. These things are insanely tough. Not only do they have a high armor number, they also have what's called special armor, which is some sort of reactive armor, chop-up armor, laminate armor. To be fair, the T-80Us also have the same special rule that helps them. It's some sort of special armor that helps defeat shaped charge warheads. But once that Bradley goes up, the passengers, that's the infantry team inside the Bradley, gets a survival check to see if they bail out of the vehicle. Even if they do, you see all those white poker checks next to them? That's their morale markers, and they are currently maxed out. So at the moment, there's a bit of a, well, let's call it a discussion, a brisk discussion going on at the table concerning the reaction mechanic in 7 Days to the River Rhine. It's one of my favorite mechanics in the game, and this is part of what makes sure that it's never not your turn. Whenever the enemy is moving, and you can see the enemy that is either moving or shooting at you, you can declare what's called a reaction. Now there is a roll for it, and it's pretty tough, especially if your unit has taken actions earlier in the game. Again, this is what makes those poker chips, or whatever marker you have on hand. I just like using big clay poker chips. You can color code them, you can write on them, whatever works for you. But you want to keep track of morale per unit and reactions per unit. So as the Warsaw Pact moves in another platoon of T-80s, those Abrams are trying to counter-engage before they take fire from the T-80s. It's tough rolling, but if they can pull it off, awesome. Here we see some of the American support assets, including that Avenger. That's basically a Humvee with 4 basically Stinger SAM missiles on the back of it. That's a piece of wreckage terrain that I sort of converted back into an active unit. Apologies if that unit looked a little rough and ready, but he's doing some good work here, that's for sure. So one missile actually forced the Hind into an evasive maneuver. The second missile actually took out the Hind. I believe to do this, Steve had to make 2 reaction rolls. So some serious dice rolling there because he's only got 1 Avenger, which means that same Avenger first had to roll a 3+, hit, and then actually chase off the Hind. Then he had to make another reaction roll at +1 difficulty. He had to roll a 4-up on a D6, hit with I think an 8+ on a D10, and then score at least a 5-up to actually smash the Hind out of the sky. So Steve's dice, I won't lie, have been pretty hot. Here we see an unfortunate T-80 with all kinds of problems. Notice all those white poker checks stacked up next to him? Those are morale markers. Those are all kinds of incremental damage. The crew got shaken up. He's lost some of his targeting systems, his visions, who knows what. But what it means in game terms is each one of those white poker checks is going to be a +1 difficulty to his activation or pretty much anything he tries to do, like to hit. So effectively, he's pinned down because he has to roll like a 6 just to activate and a 6 to hit anything, even if it's right in front of him. Notice there are some American tanks the same way. So another thing that happens when you get maxed out on these poker checks, you take 1 more morale check, the unit is considered destroyed. The crew bails, and the tank is considered lost for game purposes and victory conditions. Alrighty, this is exactly what I was talking about. There's another Abrams now burning, and believe it or not, it was taken out by that T-80 hiding behind that corner there. It sounds crazy. How can a T-80 get through the frontal chop-up armor of an M1 Abrams, especially in hull down position? Okay, it's called teamwork and tactics. So what winds up happening here was that Abrams was maximum stacked on morale. What wound up happening was earlier in the turn, the sole surviving Mi-24 Hind, again, one of the Hinds has been shot down by the Avenger surface-to-air missile system, hit the flank of the Abrams chop-up armor with an AT-5 Spandrel anti-tank guided weapon. Tied the armor. So if you beat the armor with your penetration roll, you blow up the tank. If you tie it, the vehicle is still in action but considered maximum stacked on its morale checks. So then all you have to do is tap it 1 more time from the front. So this was actually a little piece of great teamwork and tactics between Tom and his Hinds and Ron and that T-80 tank shooting from the front. It's a lot of fun to play the side that has the big technological edge. the Americans, the Germans, the Israelis, these kinds of powers. The problem is you're going to be up against much larger numbers. And if that second world or third world force knows his stuff and has good rules to make use of his numbers, and 7 Days to the River Rhine does have some rules that help the Warsaw Pact side. There's Warsaw Pact platoon activation and Warsaw Pact platoon fire orders where they can fire multiple tanks at once. And even though it's really tough to get through the frontal armor of these insanely powerful NATO main battle tanks, you ping them, and if you don't actually get through the armor, you'll max them out on morale and destroy them that way. In this case, we had some great teamwork, coordination, and tactics, combined arms really, between, again, Tom and that Hind hitting him on the flank, followed by Ron hitting him from the front with that T-80 gunshot. So well done. Not to be outdone, Steve is now bringing in his AH-64D Apache anti-tank helicopter gunship. He almost kind of has to at this point. He's down to basically that one Abrams you see there in the parking lot. There is another Abrams at that other hull down position that we were looking at a minute ago. The problem is 2 of them are burning, and the one that's left already has 2 activations on him plus 3 morale checks. So that's pretty much plus 5. He has to roll essentially a 6 to do anything further in this turn. I think we're wrapping up turn 2 at the moment. So he wants to bring in his attack helicopter gunship. Notice some American vehicles there at the bottom of your screen are still not in the battle. The same thing is definitely true on the Soviet side. One thing I kind of noticed here, to be perfectly honest, if I can offer just a small observation. To be fair, this was everybody's first time with the system. They didn't seem to be to make much use of their either mechanized infantry or their motor rifles on the American or the Soviet side respectively until they ran out of tanks. And in 7 Days to the River Rhine, you run out of tanks with some horrific speed, let me tell you something. So the Shilka gets some reaction fire against this Apache. The Shilka will miss as the dice turn out. And now what's going to happen is, boom, there he goes. Okay, the Hellfire from the Apache just took out another one of the T-80Us. Again, as you can see from clear across the table, that's like 7 feet as measured on the table there. So again, ranges are pretty much unlimited in this game. Some weapons do have a range that you have to watch out for, some of the lighter stuff, and some weapons have a minimum range. Once the enemy gets too close, you're not able to shoot up. That includes the anti-tank guided weapons like we saw just used here by that Apache. Moving into turn 3, the Soviets are bringing in their Hind gunship, their surviving Hind gunship. You can see him way back there on the side, trying to put another AT-5 Spandrel anti-tank missile into the flank of the M1A1 Abrams, parked there on the airport runway. Now notice that Tom is rolling 2 dice there in that bucket, 2 dice for his penetration check. Because he scored a hit, now he has to penetrate the armor. He has to roll 2 dice. That's because the Abrams has what the game calls special armor. So 7 Days to the River Rhine takes things like Chobom armor, reactive armor, laminate armor, and it generalizes it together in what they basically call special armor. If a tank takes a hit against its special armor by a high explosive weapon, like the shape charge on the head of a missile, what the attacking player has to do is roll his penetration roll twice and use the worst result. So he needed a 6, he actually wound up with a 7 and a 10, so that's another M1 Abrams smoked. The last T-80 is now engaged in a desperate one-on-one tank duel with the last Abrams, ironically. There's the other Abrams, like we said before, was smoked by an AT-5 missile fired, by that guy right there. There's the culprit. Okay, so there's a white morale token, and that red is Ron's first activation. He has to basically beat a 1. He's already done that just to activate on a D6. He's rolled to hit, now he's rolling to penetrate. He rolls a 5. It doesn't penetrate the M1's frontal Chobom armor. It does put a morale token on Steve's tank, which means Steve is going to have additional difficulty trying to react and interrupt that T-80's fire. Those 2 tanks there, you see there at lower left and upper right, are just trading shots right now and trying to beat each other in activation. The loaders and the gunners in those turrets, although the T-80 doesn't have a loader, the tank crews in both those vehicles are absolutely in a frantic, one-on-one eye-to-eye sort of shootout. I'm not going to lie, I don't like the T-80's chances because, again, the frontal armor of an Abrams is just nasty. In order for the Soviets to win these tank duels, they have to have additional numbers so that they can flank or so they can stack up multiple hits very quickly. And again, they're not going to penetrate the armor, but they're at least going to force enough morale tokens to increase the Americans' difficulty to shoot back, or if they get really lucky, force a bailout. So, again, Steve has been hit, although he's survived. Steve has been hit multiple times now. There are multiple morale tokens stacked up on top of his tank. Nevertheless, he did finally score a hit on the front of the T-80. He rolled a 7, plus the M1's firepower value of 11, which equals 18. That is exactly the T-80U's armor rating. So that T-80U is now going to be maximum stacked on morale tokens. The end is nigh for him, I'm afraid. Well, folks, there you have it. Part 1 of our Sword Point episode in 7 Days to the River Rhine. Stay tuned for Part 2 that's going to be coming out in about a week. As you can probably tell already, if you weren't already familiar with 7 Days to the River Rhine, man, 7 days is not a system to let the grass grow under its feet. The second you come on the table, even a big table like this, you are usually in killing range of a whole bunch of different attack systems on the table. You really got to watch yourself. You've got to use tactics like terrain masking, division of fires, maneuver into economy of force. And there's no rules for this stuff. You have to actually know the real world tactics to make your army work, because the weapon systems on the table are just so long range and just so lethal. Even the Americans, who have obviously fantastically superior equipment, have taken pretty steep losses so far. We've got multiple Abrams already on fire. We've got, I think, some APCs are already cooked off. It's a nasty scrap, and let me tell you something. This could still go both ways. The Soviets have obviously lost a lot more equipment and material. They had a lot more to start with. This game is coming down surprisingly even. So please come back next week and check out part 2 of this episode, and let us know what you think of Sword Point in 7 Days to the River Rhine. In the meantime, if you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help us out and grow our community. In the meantime, we are rounds complete for another episode here on the Sitrep podcast. Tango Mike, as always, for listening, and we'll be in touch very soon.